Now, complete payment holidays at this point in time are going to be the last resort, the last thing that you might agree with a tenant. Now, if they genuinely have zero income, especially for a short period of time, you've got to be practical. Even if you did serve a notice, you can't evict them at this particular point in time because there's a hold on that for the next 3 months anyway. But also, do you really want to be in a position where you're adding to the stress, adding to the worries at this point in time by serving a notice when there's something that's probably outside the tenant's control? So a complete payment holiday is the last resort. What you should be doing is you should be agreeing a reasonable payment plan with your tenant based on what they can afford. So actually the first step in any arrangement that's made with regards to rent at this period of time between the landlord and the tenant, whether that's made between landlord and tenant directly or whether that's made between landlord and tenant with the lettings agent doing their job in the middle, negotiating between those two parties. What you should be looking to do is the conversation starts with understanding what the tenant's situation is to begin with. How have they been directly impacted by the coronavirus? Is it a case that they are in ill health themselves and they're having to self-isolate? Are they maybe one of the vulnerable tenants on the list and therefore they need to effectively self-isolate, not because they're ill right now, but because they've been told by the government, by the NHS, to stay indoors for their own safety? Or is it a case that some of the lockdown measures have maybe reduced their ability to work, the number of hours that they can work, or potentially removed their work entirely? So start off by understanding, is this a case of no income, reduced income, and what the level of the reduction of income is. Then the next part of the conversation between the landlord and tenant is looking at what the tenant can afford to pay and when they can afford to pay it. So that might mean if they're self-employed, we know the government recently announced measures to support the self-employed in the same way that they're supporting salaried employees and some businesses as well. That might mean that you have to agree that payments might significantly reduce or cease until some of that funding comes in for the self-employed in June. If they're in a position where they need to claim universal credit, we know that there's a 4 to 6 week delay in claiming universal credit, although they may also have options as soon as they qualify for universal credit to take some loans. The government has said that they are trying to speed up some of those loans that have generally been available for a number of years for claimants of universal credit, speed up the administration of that. So even if the universal credit claim may take another few weeks to come through, there may be an opportunity for someone to get effectively a crisis loan beforehand to make sure that they can pay for necessities like food and drink, gas, water, electricity, and obviously their rent or their mortgage payments at this difficult time. Okay, the other thing to look at is maybe they're in a situation where they might be on reduced hours, or they might be one of these furloughed workers who's waiting for a payment of 80% of their salary, which there may be a time lag on as well, but it's not planned on being as long as the time lag for self-employed people. So first off, understand their situation, understand their timescales. When can they pay? And based on what they know about their income right now, what can they afford to pay? The other thing that you want to agree at this point in time, and at the moment we're working on a 3-month time horizon. Now, that may extend, that may shorten. We know that there's been announcements from the government that they're reviewing this as they see increases or decreases in the infection rate, in the death rate around coronavirus. They will review this. They will relax things if it's appropriate. They may also tighten up some of these measures if required to really get on top of the coronavirus outbreak as well. So at the moment, the best thing we can do, and the only thing we can do, based on what's being said right now, is make a plan effectively for the next 3 months. So what that would mean is I might be agreeing as a landlord a reduced rent payment over the next 3 months. And that might be based on what my tenant can afford to pay. But then as part of that as well, and this should all be recorded in writing, there's an agreement that 4 months from now, their rent payment will start to increase again to offset the debt they've accumulated. Now, ultimately, if this goes on for longer than 3 months, then this may need to be revisited as things kind of update as time goes on. But at the moment, you're agreeing something for the next 3-month period. And importantly, you're agreeing what will happen once lockdown measures are relaxed a little bit, once we hope everyone can go back to work a little bit more normally. How will the tenant then recover from this and pay back the rent that they've not paid during that period? So that's very, very important. This payment plan is not just about a rent reduction right now, it's about what happens in the future as well. And this is about protecting your income as a landlord, but importantly, this is about giving breathing space to the tenant as well in this difficult time. So don't think of this as an adversarial conversation. It's not tenants v landlords, landlords v tenants. This is all of us working together to find a compromise solution that works on both sides, that makes sure that over the long term, and I mean over the next few years, the landlord doesn't lose out in terms of the rent that they would normally receive for that property, because most landlords run this as a business and it's a way of supporting themselves and their families. So they shouldn't lose out in the long term. They should get everything that their own. But ultimately as well, this is a very difficult time for everybody involved, and we need to be understanding and do everything we can to support each other. And that includes tenants as well, keeping them in their property, making sure they don't become homeless at this difficult time, making sure that we don't add to their stress because we're compromising on the amount they pay and when they pay it with what they can afford at this point in time. So have that open dialogue yourself with your tenants or via the lettings agent, but start from that position of what is the tenant's situation, what can they afford, and ultimately then agreeing with them how they will recover from it later on, and making sure that both sides are comfortable with that, because that's the most important thing. This is not a forgiveness or a writing off of that rent due, it's a deferment of that debt. So it does add to payments later on, and that's got to be fair on both sides. And finally, when you are agreeing any payment plans, it's very, very important for landlords just to collect some evidence as to why this is directly related to the coronavirus and government measures around coronavirus as opposed to any other issues. And that comes on to some of the things that we as landlords need to do or businesses need to do if they're applying for any finance or assistance at this particular point in time. One of the things that has come out very, very clearly is this is not there to support businesses or landlords or people that were already in financial difficulties. Any finance, any grants, any assistance that's there at the moment is for people directly affected by coronavirus, i.e. you don't get rewarded at the moment, or you don't get a free pass right now because of coronavirus if you are already in arrears, not paying what you were supposed to if there was already an underlying issue there. So it is important that you collect some evidence from the tenants around why they're in financial difficulties right now, because that might be important for you as a landlord if you need to go and approach any lenders and say that you're in financial difficulties as a result. That's the kind of the paper trail, the evidence to back all of that up.